caught. What are you talking about? Let's keep going. What do you mean? Go. You sure? Yeah. Hurt!
Well, if you recognize that last scene, that's Thelma and Louise driving their convertible off the cliff at about 120 miles an hour, heading into the abyss below. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is what's gone on. We have Barack Obama is at the wheel. His fellow Democrats are in the passenger seat. He's got a brick laying on the gas pedal, and we have been locked in the trunk. That's where we're at, and we're going 120 miles an hour toward the abyss. Now, what that means is there is only one thing that we can do, and that is we've got to find some way to disable the transmission. We got to lock that puppy up. We got to throw a monkey wrench into that thing that'll seize it up so the car comes to a screeching dead halt before we all go over the cliff together. Now, that's how desperate the circumstances are, and what I'm suggesting, there are things that we can do. We have resources at our disposal. We do not have to panic. What we got to do is we can stay cool, we can stay calm, we can stay collected, because there are things that we can do. So we don't have to lose our cool here. We can stay focused, and the solution is, I've talked long-term, let's start picking a candidate to run in 2016, but the other things we can do is lean on our representatives. Don't raise the debt ceiling. You're the ones that are talking about a balanced budget. Okay, well, here's your chance. If the deadline for the debt ceiling comes up and you don't raise the debt ceiling, ladies and gentlemen, we have a balanced budget by close of business that day. We don't need a balanced budget amendment to do it. We just need enough spinal fluid in the cervical columns of the House of Representatives to say, no, we're not going to do it. We're going to start living within our means like President Obama has been preaching for years and years and years. Now, that'll gum the thing up. That's gridlock. That will bring D.C. and the federal government to a screeching halt, but it will bring spending under control immediately. No more out-of-control debt, no more out-of-control spending, balanced budget, boom, Zippo, just like that. So that is step number one. That's how we throw a wrench into the transmission, is by urging the House to exercise their constitutional power to keep spending under control. As nothing, they're playing by the rules. That's what the Constitution authorizes them to do. And then number two is get the Senate to commit to blocking. They can filibuster every Supreme Court nominee. Barack Obama will likely appoint 3 Supreme Court nominees, 2, maybe 3, because there's going to be 3 justices that'll be 80 years old by the end of his second term. And the Republicans have enough senators, 45, they can filibuster every one of those nominees. Just say no. President Obama sends an activist, tyrannical, out-of-control judicial activist as a nominee. The Senate Republicans can say, no, we're going to filibuster that judge. There's no way you're going to get an activist judge past us. He sends another one up, he gets filibustered. Sends another one up, gets filibustered. Now, they got to be prepared. If God forbid, one of the justices would die, you got to be prepared to run that Supreme Court shorthanded with 8 or 7. Well, and the Supreme Court justice would have to retire, so the seat's going to be vacant, whether they retire because of health or just because they want to retire or whether illness takes them out. That doesn't matter. There's going to be a vacant seat, and the Republicans got to be willing to weather the storm. We're just not going to do it. Our Constitution, republic, our future as a nation, it matters too much. We cannot afford to have another activist tyrant sitting on the Supreme Court bench. Now, those are 2 things that can be done. And we with the makeup we have right now, with the people we got in office right now, we can get a balanced budget. This is the beautiful thing, ladies and gentlemen. We can get a balanced budget, and we can protect the Supreme Court from activist judges, and we don't have to change a single solitary thing to do that. We don't have to elect anybody else. We don't have to pass any law to get that done. We can do that today with the makeup of the House and the Senate. The only question then is going to be whether we're going to have representatives and senators with enough moxie, with enough spine, with enough courage to paint with the bold colors to get that done. Well, let's go to the phones and take some post-game analysis from some of our callers. Let's go to Tony in Paducah, Kentucky. Tony, you're on Focal Point with Brian Fisher. What's on your mind?
Hey, Brian, it's good to talk to you again.
Good to good to have you back on.
Well, thank you. I just woke up. It felt like I had 1,000 pounds on my shoulders this morning. It's been pretty hard, but listening to your network, your radio station, and all this morning, it's very uplifting. It's really the only one of many that makes sense out there. So it is good to be able to tune in and get some directive on this. But a couple things real quick. I think we're going to have to try and find a way to get hold of our education system. We have let that slip away. We have a lot of young people that have been dumbed down. They just don't have a clue as to how this country works, where it came from, or anything else, how we got where we are. And I think that's a very important step. And my other idea is if we could get Judge Napolitano to run in 2016, that's my Andrew Napolitano. That's my pick for president. I really like that man. He gets it. He's intelligent. He's electable and very well spoken. So, and I just have to, there's this thing that keeps me going. Half this country is still sane. That's what we saw last night. Half of us are still sane.
Well, that's a good point. I don't know what the final totals are on Governor Romney, but it's like 50. I don't know it was 55 million. I mean, they were both over 55 million, and Governor Romney was a couple million behind. But that's a lot of people were voting for the more conservative of the two candidates. That's a very, very good point. Well, thanks, Tony. Appreciate the call. He likes Judge Napolitano. I didn't have a chance to go over this yesterday, but he was talking about the educational system. This will show you how far gone it is. Here's a story from the Daily Princetonian. This is the student newspaper at Princeton University. 157 members of the Princeton University faculty or staff have donated to the two presidential candidates. 157 have made donations to either the campaign coffers, made donations to the campaign coffers of Barack Obama or to Mitt Romney. Of those 157 faculty and staff at Princeton University, 155 of them donated to Barack Obama. Two of them, count them, two of them out of 157 donated to Mitt Romney. And the two that did, one was a visiting lecturer and the second one was a janitor. So that's how far left our system of education has gone. They're nothing more now than re-education camps. Let's go to James in Columbus, Ohio. James, you're on Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Talk to me. What's on your mind?
Hi. Hey, I just want to say I believe that Barack Obama would not be president if God didn't want him to be, number one. And number two, he might have this country on a path to judgment.
Mm-hmm. Well, and let me back up, James, and ask to clarify what you mean by God wanting Barack Obama to be president. Clarify that for me. I'm not sure I understand what you mean.
I'm thinking of the sovereignty of God, and
all right.
Nothing happens without his hand, and it helps me to believe that, he's there for a reason, and the Bible speaks to honoring those in authority over us, and they're put there by God, and they have to deal with the Lord to how they do their job.
And what you're suggesting, James, if I understand you correctly, then what you're suggesting is maybe in God's sovereign control of human events, he's allowing Barack Obama to be the president because it's a mechanism by which his judgment can be brought to bear on a rebellious land.
I believe that. And because it's only going to get worse with him, he's not going to change anything. He's going to continue down the same path. And it's just a sign for Christians to draw closer to the Lord and to be doing his business in the meantime, because I believe it's coming and he's coming.
Okay, well, good, James. I appreciate that. And, you hear a lot of pablum out there about, and I appreciate the mature perspective that James is bringing. You hear a lot of pablum out there from Christians. Oh, God is still on the throne. God hasn't lost still got his hand on the tiller and all that. Like that's supposed to be comforting to us. But what I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I believe God is sovereign. I believe he is in control of all of human history. He's in control of what happens in this country. Nothing's going to happen without his permission. Nothing's going to happen that hadn't been filtered through his will. I firmly believe that. But the fact that God is sovereign, rather than being a comfort to a nation like ours, it ought to scare us half to death. because a sovereign God has told us in the Scripture what happens to a nation that turns its back on him. The sovereign God, the God that sits on his throne, that controls everything, he's told us what happens, how he deals with a nation that turns its back on him, and it's not a pretty picture. In other words, the fact that God is still on his throne is not a comforting fact. It ought to scare us right to the soles of our feet, because he's made it very clear that a nation, just like individuals, reaps what it sows. Now, the fact that he's sovereign and powerful indicates that if God's people will turn to him and implore him and appeal to him and depend upon him and do what he directs us to do, it's possible that change can take place. It's possible that judgment can be averted. Remember Nineveh. You know, God sent Jonah to Nineveh, said, yet 40 days and this city will be overthrown. That was God announcing his judgment, saying to Nineveh, you got about a month and a week. You got 40 days, less than 6 weeks, to get your act together, or I am going to burn this place to the ground. Well, they repented, and God stayed his hand of judgment. His judgment did not fall, even though he said it would come, because they repented in dust and ashes, because the political leaders of the city of Nineveh repented in dust and ashes. His judgment was averted. So there is both comfort and terror in knowing that God is, in fact, a sovereign God. So I appreciate that perspective that James has brought, and that's what we always want to do. This is where the Hurricane Sandy thing comes into play. Our founding fathers understood that they called them acts of God for a reason. Natural disasters were called acts of God for a reason. They were obviously outside the control of man, and therefore ultimately they were under the supervision of God. God was the only one that could stop them. So they understood that these things were acts of God. And they always asked the question, have we done something to anger a righteous God? They would call for days of mourning, days of repentance, days of prayer and fasting to seek the God of heaven. Have we offended you? What have we done that's offended you that you have brought this act of judgment on us as a people? And I think it's appropriate that we do that in the wake of Hurricane Sandy. Focal Point AFR Talk, back in 2.